Brazilian coach sat down with HLTV for a long interview about his roller coaster with the stint on Liquid. They began with high expectations, became one of the biggest flops in recent years. Oh, okay, also, can we... Bro, like even HLTV is, I mean, okay, I realize they imploded the roster, so maybe that's the flop, but they literally went from 50 to just outside of top 10. Calling this the biggest flop when like rosters like the C9 roster existed, where they literally were maybe the strongest team we've ever seen assembled on paper to completely lose Shiro in like 2 months. Anyway, I just feel like we're just ignoring so many things. But anyway, Zeus recalled a very big fight around the end of January. That was when the problems began. Jesus Christ. That's literally like 2 weeks because like they wouldn't have started right at New Year's. So like from then on, Jesus. So they had a fight 2 weeks in and then everybody's big angry the whole time. Nice. Perfect. They all held grudges. The Brazilian confirmed the public notion that the team didn't fully buy into CadiaN's system. I'm shocked. And the Danish IGL struggled to adapt to a new style because he's never called that way, and you brought in CadiaN, not Kerrigan. It wasn't just because of one person that it failed. It was a systematic thing where we couldn't make this compatible, so to speak. Zeus is currently keeping his options open, though coaching doesn't seem to be high on his list of priorities. Yeah, my man's probably like, you know what? Maybe I should just stay done. I first wanted to ask how you describe your time at Liquid and what goals were set when you joined the org at the end of last year. If you were to describe the time at Liquid a few words, it would be short and disappointing. I guess those are the words I'd use. The goals were in the first season, obviously, to make the major. That was the most important one, and it hurt us a lot. But in the scheme of things, my role in Liquid was establishing the long term, so we were going to chase ranking points to get invites since we were starting from scratch. Yeah, they were literally 50th. Because it's chaos, the scheduling and travel, yeah, you need the invites especially. We wanted, of course, to qualify for the major, but the most important thing was to establish ourselves as a top 16 or top 10 team. They did do that, actually. That could be directly qualified for events with Liquid, so I had bigger vision where we wanted to go. But the immediate focus was on making this lineup work and positioning ourselves in the rankings. It's actually kind of funny. Like, obviously, you know, they did miss the major, and I'm sure that was like a huge blow to the team. But they actually, this is surprising to hear because they're at 14th right now. But look, well, you're like, right, where do they make the changes? Yeah, they're literally in there. They're right in there, right here. Look, top 10, top 15. Anyway. Sorry, I'm still annoyed. I'd also like to ask you a little bit of how the team was put together. When you joined the team, the signings hadn't been yet made. How did the team come about? Who was involved in the process? What was your role in particular in putting the team together? Steve sent me a message asking if I was doing anything. He told me about reformulating the project, and at first it was something completely different. It would be with OC and Breeze in a full NA lineup, but there was a possibility of making an alternate blockbuster roster that he'd been working on. That's actually fucking wild to just read. I mean, at the time, keeping OC wasn't like a terrible move. He was actually, despite all the hate that OC always gets, I think especially when he's playing in the tier 1 competition, the end of OC's stint with the European roster, he was the best player on that team. Breeze is a total shot in the dark that I'm very surprised to read. I'm a big believer in Breeze, like, I know his individual level, but also just based on what he's shown in the server, I'm just surprised to see his name mentioned there. CadiaN, Twisty, Kinder, and Naf, but instead of Skullz, it would be Quesarado. Shocker. He wanted to try and help bring him in, which we ultimately couldn't do because he didn't really want to leave Fury at the time. Who essentially made the decision? Was it your move? No, it was a consensus. Joke had already basically put it all together and wouldn't have been able to have that sort of power despite what everyone thinks. This is what I try to explain to people all the time. This dynamic of general managers doesn't exist in Counter-Strike. Okay, like say Steve has like a vision for what the roster should be. If the players don't want it, it's never going to happen. The players have a ton of influence. And I know that happens in like traditional sports too. You deal with superstar players that like have more influence on teams. But in Counter-Strike specifically, I think most esports, like basically if not, like every player gets that treatment. And I'm not saying Twist isn't a superstar, CadiaN, whatever. I'm not trying to argue semantics, but just in general, players basically control the rosters. There's people that are in charge of managing those players, but at the end of the day, it's the players that control these teams. So yeah, so it was a consensus, especially with CadiaN Twist. At the time, Twist was a very valuable and important piece for Liquid, and we were uncertain if he'd be joining with CadiaN. It was more or less certain that he would come. So for Twist, he was really keen to come to Liquid at the time. Then FaZe started having great results, and then he decided, and he needed to decide where to go. And Twist really liked Skullz' game and said, if this kid comes, I'll join the team. So we sped up the discussions with him. Skullz was a guarantee that we get Twist, me, CadiaN, and the lineup would be locked in. So interesting to me that Skullz was like actually the catalyst to move Twist. I think an important aspect of this is you do have to, this is Zeus's perspective of the situation. Important to remember when Twist talked about his time leaving FaZe. I also imagine a huge part of this was the fact that he basically got ghosted from FaZe during this entire discussion. I just find it really hard to believe that Skullz was the pure reason that Twist came over. I think more what happened, at least, and this is just me, I could be completely delusional. I feel like what more or less happened is FaZe just continued to ghost Twist, and Twist was just like kind of itching for something. Saw Skullz doing really well individually, and then that kind of just like got the engine going and was like, yeah. So like I think this is true, but I think that the original catalyst is probably just FaZe's lack of communication with Twist, because they were getting bought out and there was a whole bunch of unknowns at the time with FaZe. From Zeus's perspective, though, this is like probably what happened. I believe Zeus. Zeus isn't going to lie about something like this. This would be just weird. And just in general, he's like a really stand-up dude. So I don't think he's like lying. I just think that this is from his perspective. And I just think added context is Twist, towards the end of his contract, literally said he basically didn't get reached out to by FaZe until he basically had already signed with Liquid. Can you explain a little bit more about your role in managing the team? When it comes to setting up the team, I didn't have much power and the work had already been done by Joker. So credit to him for pulling that off. But in terms of managing the team, it was assembled. I can't hide from my responsibilities. I had management power, but things were decided by a committee at Liquid. And I think that's one of the problems that we had. Yeah, that's awful. Hey, you could coach, but also I'd like to tell you and have input on how you should do your job. And I don't know if that's like because of Steve or the players or what, but that's awful. There wasn't one voice, and it wasn't my voice, Joka's or Edwards. Everything was decided by a committee, and that's this. Yeah, and from my experience, leading by a committee doesn't work. It does not. You have to take all the input and feedback and make appropriate decisions, but you have to follow a specific line of thinking. You can't go and try to please everyone. There has to be a voice of command, essentially, right? Yeah, exactly. That was necessary. Nobody had that power. I tried at times, but it wasn't possible. There were a lot of talk about team building activities you did at the end of the year, even before you started competing, that gave the impression that everyone got on well, that you're building a good atmosphere. In your opinion, did you start to feel the first problems in the team? I think the only bad thing about the activities was that we did content around them. Personally, I think they were really cool. I thought the atmosphere on the team at the start was really good. It's really hard to pinpoint where it all changed. I think there was a very big fight when the team, that's what he mentioned earlier. Yeah, around the end of January. I could see it unfold, so it didn't happen overnight. It was something that snowballed, let's put that way, and it's not like things changed completely, but we began to see clash of, yeah, the honeymoon phase wore off. And the fact that you made content out of the team building activities isn't necessarily bad, but it all absolutely becomes a public weapon against you. That's the double-edged sword of all the content. Anything that you put out there to the public, the public will use that, including myself. I will include myself in this. Given the signs that were already there within the team, was the fact that you didn't qualify for the major a surprise, or did you almost fear that it might happen? It was certainly a surprise, but not in the sense that we didn't know it was possible. We also knew that we could qualify, and the scrims had gone well. I think that a bit of the pressure and expectations it led to this, along with the key decisions in games. And well, the format. No, unfortunately, it was terrible. It cost us, but it was the format we had, and we had to qualify regardless, right? So I think, yeah. I mean, it's good to hear him not use it. It's an easy crutch, but like, that format was dick. Absolutely embarrassing that we still had that format, if I'm being completely honest. I'm really not trying to like give Liquid an excuse. It's still on them, but like that format was fucking terrible. And the fact that they had basically almost an entire year to come up with something better and they just didn't is crazy. Oh man, we have an odd number of teams now. We could change the format because this is really whack how this works, or we could just not. At the start of the team, I did everything to put CadiaN as leader and captain so everyone could follow the calls and his ideology and really embrace his leadership. So I think throughout these problems and these disagreements and incompatibilities that started to change, there was an attempt to adapt to a style where there was more than one way of us to make rotations and play the game, because as much as there was a leadership style, there was a bit of, let's say, difficulty in how leadership was received by the team. I mean, I'm not trying to jump to conclusions, but I imagine it mostly revolve. I can't imagine NAF really having too many issues, but I could absolutely see Yakinder and Twist just like not wanting to do certain things. The leadership was gradually lost halfway in, partially due to some of CadiaN's own decisions and partially due to some harsh resistance and opposition put up by some players. Then the big problem we had was how to restructure the leadership moving forward. CadiaN would keep calling. We'd have our own style with everyone's ideas and inputs. Yeah, you can't run this shit by committee. This is awful. This is exactly what it seemed like too. But you don't really know, and just like see, like I hate how obvious all of this was in the server. You just can't do this shit by committee, man. I mean, you're leading out of the game. Like the team's decisions are a committee. The end game is what the fuck? Like, oh man. Since the players left the team, there's a lot of talk about the incompatibilities, specifically with how some players on the team might not have believed in CadiaN's system, where like on Heroic, he was commanding the troops at all times and the players trusted him at all times. And there's also been talk of CadiaN maybe not being able to adapt to the needs of the team and the way players wanted to play. Is that really how it was? It was more or less like this. Of course, it's never black and white. I think we had some good things from CadiaN's system. The difference is that he had always played with players who follow him blindly but didn't have that much experience or skill at the beginning. And Liquid players had already won a lot, which, I mean, I hate that I'm reading this and I just feel like this is a giant, like, affirming everything that I felt, but it's kind of more annoying reading it. I don't know why. They're players who are capable of making their own decisions. Yeah. So there was very strong opposition from players, but there was also difficulty from CadiaN to adapt. Well, yeah, like at that point, it's doomed. Without being dramatic and, you know, even without, you know, with the hindsight we have now of what actually happened, you can't bring in somebody that led and IGL'd one way, then tell them not to do it that way, and then also have the players who are supposed to be under him basically want a say in everything that that leader does. If you don't want to do it that way, then CadiaN should have never been in the team. It really is that simple. There's no fucking way that Naf, Twist, and Ykinder didn't see CadiaN on Heroic and know that this is what it would be like. And if you're telling me it's all done by committee, that means they're all like, let's do this. And then like saying, well, not like that. Like, what do you mean not like that? Like, I'd probably be a bit fucking burnt out too, to be honest, if I were in that situation. Looking back, do you think it was just a matter of time before CadiaN being the wrong leader, or it was just a matter of CadiaN being the wrong leader? To put it shortly, yes, not because of incompetence or anything like that. I think he's a real captain. I think he's a leader above all. But I just think he was not the right leader for the team. Yeah, pretty much. He was set up to fail by everyone. This really does just make me want to defend CadiaN even more. I'm going to be honest. Like when I read shit like this, like, hey, by the way, we know we signed CadiaN, but can you be Kerrigan? Like, of course, CadiaN is no longer going to be motivated. Like, I don't think any normal human would be in that scenario. How are you as CadiaN then supposed to basically just be everything that you're not and then be happy and then like want to push forward in the team? Even if you were trying to make it work, it just feels like you're being undermined with every decision that you're making. Like, why would you want to continue to build in that environment? Like, I'm not trying to paint CadiaN as like this perfect person. Like, he probably has his fair share of blame in here in like different ways, but I'm just saying from the start, if this is like everything that was going on, it is just, he was set up to fail. I wanted to ask you about Skullz, someone a lot of people associated with you because he's also Brazilian. He also didn't have that much tier 1 experience. He also always seemed to be a gamble. I think Skullz associated with me is kind of logical, right? Part of my duties was to bring in that 5th player who wouldn't be from Europe to help with the spots, even though, as I said, it wasn't just me. Yeah, because they had a whole fucking committee, bro. It would be unfair to not take responsibility. What failed in his case, hard to say. A little bit of homesickness was part of it because it was a different experience for him. It was his first international experience. He's fluent in English, but there's a difference between speaking English and having to communicate in milliseconds. So that hurt a bit in the beginning, just like the preseason retreat and the fact that people were speculating on his buyout and there were already some pressure because of it. And also the fact that the team had already had renowned players who can teach you, but at the same time, they can criticize you, right? Giving feedback from your idols is a tricky thing. Also, it later got confirmed that his buyout was not what everybody was saying it was, because I will just explain this for the 10 millionth time. Buyouts are like the starting point, and sometimes they are nowhere near the end point, okay? So Skullz buyout could have potentially and probably was listed at 600K, but you can use Kassad, for example, who talked about how organizations asked for 1.5 million for players in buyouts, and he ended up paying like 100K. So that's also like, I imagine that's got to suck for him, where the community for Skullz was like, he's not worth 600K, what the fuck? And it's just like this, people still don't realize that like that's the fucking starting point, dude. Whatever you end up agreeing to is the actual number, not what's on the contract. And in the beginning, I think he was criticized a lot internally. He was our scapegoat from the start. So from the start, it made think, oh fuck, he was internally the scapegoat. I believe that if you ask him, he'll say that on Liquid, he only had a few moments where he showed that he knew what he was doing, and generally suffered a lot emotionally and mentally, and even in terms of the system, the role. I mean, yeah, that team environment must have been dog shit. With him being a Brazilian player coming from Liquid, I think he'll bring in some new things that he saw. I think he'll play much more loosely, much more comfortably, and the atmosphere will be better in terms of making him feel at home and not isolated. I was there with him, but I'm 36 and his coach, right? There's only so much I can do to make him feel comfortable. We live different lives, so the best I could do to support him, I think he'll do well in Furia, and I hope to see him keep growing and showing what he's capable of. Listen, I understand he probably had the least amount of experience, but if he was getting scapegoated internally too, Jesus Christ, man. Like, to be honest, I didn't think I was going to leave until I got to Brazil and had a chat with Joka. everything changed. Speaking about your departure from Liquid, how was this whole process managed? Did you discuss the possibility of staying with the team? Was it your decision or mutual? The last few months of Liquid was really complicated. There was a lot of uncertainty about what would happen. We had unhappy players and different scenarios were being considered. To be honest, I didn't even think I was going to leave until I got to Brazil and had a chat with Joka. Everything changed. I had been under the impression that I was guaranteed that I wouldn't leave now. That would restructure things and there was still time to get things in order, so it wasn't my decision. But I admit that I was very unhappy towards the end. I had sacrificed my health a lot and we weren't bringing in the results we wanted. I also believe that for a team to be a champion, consistently good, everyone must want to be there, which wasn't the case for us. So this led to a lot of unhappiness within the team. It wasn't a mutual decision. I don't think anyone wanted it in the end, nor did they know how it would turn out. So much so that I received message from players like, I thought you were doing well. We were doing well. And I don't know what happened. What the fuck? Holy fuck. This is why I'm so glad I just stream and just I'm individual. Like all the gripes you ever want to have about Mythic, totally fair. But you know what? It's all on stream. Like Jesus Christ, I don't think Zeus is lying, dude. I think somebody is this like obtuse. They're either obtuse or they're like really don't want to feel bad about problems they created themselves. I thought you were doing well. We were doing well. I don't know how that reads like the most. Oh God. That's like uncomfortable to read, bro. I wish I had a better way to describe it. There's some vocabulary there, but like, I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. That just reads really weird. But Liquid had to make a difficult decision. That was the result in the end. That's life. What sort of demands would you have made if you were to stay? I wouldn't be making demands to stay because I love Liquid as much as it was a sad experience in the end. We had great moments. The players, like the people there, I think they're good human beings. So I wouldn't have made demands to stay, but I would have made recommendations. I believe a team needs to have players who want to be there. That would have been my first recommendation. The second is there wasn't a leadership. We needed to establish one. We needed a voice everyone would listen to, follow, and believe. And for me, that was one of the main points. Yeah, no, leading by committee is terrible. Most important aspect was to get some things right. The culture we had within the team mentality, and the way people interacted with each other, because a lot of stuff was being handled behind the scenes instead of being addressed direct. Oh, Jesus. These motherfuckers were getting upset with each other and going and crying to somebody else instead of just addressing things head on. This is awful, dude. Because a lot of stuff was being handled behind the scenes instead of being addressed directly or even telling the person at the time there was discontentment so they could fix it. That is like actually some of the worst shit I feel like you can do in a team environment. Bottling up your discontent with a teammate or what they're upset about and just either one, never talking about it, or two, telling it to somebody else. I think so many of these players struggle from the fact that they have never played in team environments. There's no way they grew up playing sports or not for any long period of time, because this kind of stuff just is like not how you address things in a healthy team environment. That's just not what you do. It is exactly the same as it was like 10 years ago. Nothing has evolved, and in a lot of ways it's probably gotten worse with money. That is beyond insane, dude. Like if you're in a high competitive environment and you have a problem with one of your teammates, you need to be comfortable and able to voice your problems, because it builds resentment. One, two, you're not getting better, which means now, let's just say you're right in whatever you're upset with them about. A lot of good players on that team, they probably were. You're now withholding information that can make the team better. It's incredibly selfish because you don't want to hurt. But like, if the other person gets their feelings hurt, one, try not to deliver it like a fucking prick. You know, that can sometimes take time. Two, you're literally just hurting the results of everybody. It's like, it's just, oh man. People that do stuff like that, it's like, that's wild. I'm sure we're all reading this and kind of getting to conclusions and narrowing it down to who or multiple people. But I think without really being in it, it's also, this is Zeus's perspective, right? So there's always like, what is it? Their story, your story, and then there's the truth, that type of that saying. I don't want to contribute to like extra bullshit like that. I don't know, it just kind of feels icky. So I think just read it, or like I'm going to keep reading it and you can kind of come to your own conclusions. And also, don't get it twisted. If you think Liquid is the only team that's like this, you are absolutely delusional. Were you surprised by Twist's decision to be in IGL? Do you think he will succeed in the role? To give credit to Twist, I think he has a lot of in-game knowledge. Towards the end of our Liquid tenure, I would say 90 to 95% of our tactics, our playbook, and methodology were created by Twist and Yakindra already. It had already gone from CadiaN by the end, as we knew a move was going to happen, and Twist proved to be very capable. But at the same time, being a leader in IGL is much more about having a playbook and in-game knowledge. It's about leadership, how you treat your teammates and how you get the best out of them, how you deliver them the bad news to hold them to those high standards. So I believe he has a lot of work to do to prove himself in terms of leading men. But in terms of his ability as a captain and strategist, he's got that in spades, and he's probably, in my opinion, one of the top 5 players in the world with the most knowledge. Now he just needs to learn the human side and leadership side. What was externalized as the team's objectives didn't match the real internal expectations. Obviously, we had a much higher standard than what people talked about. So he's implying the fact that basically players were saying things that they didn't say internally, which that's also not a good... What motivation would a player have to lie about expectations to make it seem like the team isn't achieving their goals? Especially if you talked, and I'm sure they did talk about it internally. If you know internally what the team's goals are and you've all talked about it, and then you go and publicly say something else, and then now you've created a mismatch publicly of what the team's goals and what reality, that's... As a coach and with the Mind Body Esports guy, if they didn't have a clear, distinguished goal, I'd be fucking shocked. But that seems really like manipulative. Or yeah, I don't know. Or maybe it's not that deep. Maybe it's not that deep, but that feels really shitty too. Like, well, I think Zeus isn't really trying to absolve himself of things necessarily. I think he's got a lot of shit he wanted to say and he's laying it out there. How much of this do we got left? Damn, bro. Jesus Christ. I was asked to be more of a person to manage the team and the goals and not to focus as much on the tactical part, which makes sense. That is actually why that makes sense. But also the fact that they brought him in to manage players, but then also simultaneously didn't let him really make any choices for the team or like be the sole voice for the team, then to appoint CadiaN like authority, that immediately undermined everything. Putting like somebody in a position of power, but then also not giving them any power. Well, what the fuck do you expect them to do? And I really enjoy getting to know the meta to see what was changing and helping in other areas in terms of preparing for matches. We get to a point where I was printing out like 130 sheets of paper for each game, so we were already over prepared and even had too much in my opinion. Dude, that is fucking crazy. It was more about filtering the right information. We didn't need more analysts. It was an area that was already well covered. Liquid players like to do individual prep work themselves, which is amazing, as you'll never be as prepared if someone else is doing your homework for you. So it didn't require me to do it for them. It was more about organizing ideas together and making sure we were on the same page. We wanted to react to plays, protocols, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Looking back, do you have any regrets about your time on Liquid? Would you have done things any differently? It's like people say in English, hindsight's 20/20. I would certainly do things differently, but at the time, I did them because they seemed right in terms of dealing with the situations that were happening, but I definitely do things differently. I'd be tougher on some players, even though I didn't have the power. I'd take the liberty of saying, no, it shouldn't be this way, or yes. Yeah, you would have. After seeing how fucking bad shit went, you probably wouldn't have gone with the flow as much. Yeah, I get that. I have no regrets. It was an experience. I'm passionate about CS. I'm passionate about the game. I love Liquid. I love our scene and the esports industry, so it was really cool to be part of all of it again. I wish I could... I just feel like such a prick for saying this, but I genuinely wish this interview was eye-opening. But like, it only really reinforces like ideas that I've maintained about how a lot of these teams work internally and have worked, and they have not changed, and they will never change until people actually have authority to do what they're supposed to do. But that's incredibly difficult because in the Counter-Strikes, well, in esports, but I can't speak to the other games. In Counter-Strike, players have ruled all the rosters their entire time. Like I think I talked about this in this, like one of the videos I've shown before, which I'll show you which one I'm talking about, where basically what I'm trying to say is there's very few rosters. The organization / coach are truly in control of the roster rather than the players. And in fact, it was actually about Liquid. This video was just like, yeah, I nailed it. But like, not because I'm some genius. I've just been around it for a long period of time, way back in the day, and I've seen it all the time, and it doesn't really, outside from looking in, it hasn't really changed. More than an NA problem? Oh, it's definitely, if you think this is exclusive to NA, you are on meth. I just want you to know that. My point is in general, like, there's just very few teams right now that like the coaches actually have authority. They can, instill their vision for the game and their idea and their philosophies onto the team, and the team has to respect it, basically, right? And then there's basically the rest of the teams are not like that at all. The rest of the teams, it's the players by committee. Like, by committee, it's done. Like how you heard Liquid's doing all those, when you read through that Zeus interview with me and Zeus is telling you all these things are done by committee, I'm telling you, that's how like a lot of these other rosters are. They are done by committee, and when I say committee, I mean the players decide all of this stuff.